Hello and welcome to Resolutions, a podcast about dispute resolution and prevention. I'm your host, Alex Green IV. Today, we welcome Catherine Connor and James Dykeman from the Center for Understanding and Conflict. Catherine Connor is a graduate of the University of California, Los Angeles, where she obtained a Bachelor of Arts in History and Sociology. She obtained her law degree from the University of California, Berkeley School of Law, and is the founding partner of Connor, Lawrence, Rodney, Olheiser and Barrett, LLP, located in Santa Rosa, California. The firm was established more than 30 years ago and specializes in family and estates and trust law, and according to the firm's website, with the conviction that legal solutions come from striving to meet the hopes and dreams of clients while practicing law with respect, dignity, and integrity. Becoming a certified family law specialist in 1992 and having received numerous professional honors, including the Rex Sater Award for Excellence in Family Law, she is an expert trainer with the Center for Understanding and Conflict. James Dykeman works part-time as a marketing and communications manager for the University of Iowa and part-time as a program and marketing manager for the Center for Understanding in Conflict, where he oversees strategic communication strategy and marketing of programs and events. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and Mass Communications, which he received with highest distinction, and a certificate in nonprofit leadership and philanthropy from the University of Iowa. He is also an adjunct assistant professor and an adjunct instructor with the University of Iowa School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So our discussion today centers around the Center for Understanding and Conflict, formerly known as the Center for Mediation and Law. I kind of want to get a sense of, first of all, how you got started with the center. Like, how did you first learn about it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I actually first learned about it almost 40 years ago, which is shortly after I graduated from law school and started my own practice with another law school graduate, not really knowing what we were doing, but we heard about the center from some colleagues. And so I took my first training there in 1984. And the center had been in existence at that point just a few years. It was near the beginning of the center. And I knew that I wanted to practice law differently than what I had learned in law school and had experienced in those first few years. So I took the training there, and I was, I thought it was the best thing that I had learned since I had started law school.
Okay. And James, I know you don't work as a trainer there, but you do some communications and marketing of programs and events. How did you first get started in this capacity?
Right. So thank you. In going back to school as an adult, as a non-traditional student, I specifically wanted to gain the skills and experience necessary to help small nonprofits get the word out, to help share their message about the work that they're doing, and to reach the audiences that they could help through their organizational mission. And specifically in my experience, I've done a lot of work with homeless and at-risk youth, working with underserved communities in situations where there can be high tension or conflict between families, even between the organizations who serve them as they're struggling through some of the mental health and relational issues that come with being parts of those communities. And so I specifically look to support nonprofits in a part-time capacity, because typically that's where they are. That's the amount of time that they have for help. And when I came across the Center for Understanding and Conflict, which has an office in Santa Rosa, California, where I lived for a time and have family, I was intrigued by their mission. And the more that I dug into the organization and was able to get a better understanding of the decades of experience that they have in trying to get at the heart of conflict, stemming from their origin in the legal community, and in the recent years, as it's branched out into larger organizations and supporting other nonprofits, and more recently into supporting community members and community centers where they spend their time, I wanted to help them get that message out, because I think that it's vitally important, especially now in a time where conflict seems to find us in all sorts of places in life that we might not have expected to find it in the past, from work, in society, politics, at school, around the dinner table, at the water cooler. It's just popping up in all sorts of unexpected ways. And I wanted to help support the Center for Understanding and Conflict in getting their model to as many people that could benefit from it using this unique approach that they have.
Okay. Speaking of, the mission, right? Getting the word out and trying to understand something about the approach. What would you say? I guess I'll direct this one to Catherine, as if you could give a mission statement or an overarching goal of the center, what would that be?
Yeah, what we're trying to do is really to change how people work through conflict together. And we like to look at it that way, which is we're working through conflict. This isn't something where people are butting up against each other, but what's the way that we could teach people who are helping others work through conflict, or people who are actually in conflict themselves, to go through conflict in a different way. And that way we have is understanding. So rather than pressuring people, trying to coerce people, we want people to learn how to understand themselves, understand the other parties in the conflict, and of course, understand the context and the practical realities, and then be able to put that together. So our mission is to bring this model to anyone who could benefit from it, which is basically humanity.
Right.
Yeah.
I noticed that it says you have bringing the human issues to the table. Is that a slogan?
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know that we have slogans, but I think
Okay.
that's how we view it, which is that we all have just everyday issues. They might be smaller conflicts, they might be bigger conflicts, but we're all in this together. And we bring ourselves into those conflicts. We bring our emotions, we bring our ideas, our perspectives, and we want that all to be on the table and be able to be talked about when people are in conflict.
What is the history of the organization?
Mhm.
Who founded it and how did it come about?
Yeah, it was started by Gary Friedman and Jack Himmelstein. Gary was a lawyer in Connecticut. He actually went into his father's firm after he graduated from law school, and he was a trial lawyer for about 5 years. And he decided that wasn't for him. And he had met Jack, who was at that point a law professor who was trying to bring a more humanistic view and perspective to law schools. And the two of them started talking. Gary got in a car with his dog and drove across the country to California, and then was trying to figure out what he was going to do with his life. And some people he knew there asked him to help them work through their divorce, and then several other people's. And there wasn't really a model for mediation at that point. And the bar association were like, we don't know if this is ethical, but he started it. And what would happen is he would meet with people, and then when he was done, he would get on the phone with Jack, and they would talk about what happened and figure out what he might do the next time.
Mhm.
And out of all those conversations, they started developing the model. And then they started trying to put more form to it and structure. They came up with our 6 underlying concepts, which actually is a great story about how they did that. They've been working together for, I think, a couple of years now and trying to develop the model. And they were in Vienna at a coffee shop, having done a training there. And they said, we should really try and figure out what we think are our core concepts. And they literally took out napkins, and each one wrote down 5 ideas they had for what they thought the concepts were. And it turned out that they overlapped on 4 of the 5. And so they became
Wow.
6, 4 plus each one from one of them. And so then they just kept, developing it and making it more comprehensive and teaching it. And then it's developed more, over the course of the last 40 years, refined.
Mhm. Okay, thank you for that. When you, James, go out and just talk about the center, and how do you describe it in terms of like, what do you consider the main areas of interest in terms of its history and how it came about?
Well, it's hard to summarize 40 years for people who are interested, and every audience is different. So if I'm communicating with people from the legal profession, of which many of those who we continue to train are coming from, or if I'm speaking to those in a corporation or a nonprofit, the principles that they're going to be most interested at the outset might be a little different. Although once they go into one of our training programs, it's very consistent across the board. And that's just the focus on how, from my perspective, that human issues are at the center, and that typically within conflict, there tends to be a winner takes all attitude. There needs to be a victor, and therefore there needs to be a loser. And the understanding-based approach to mediation, as I understand it, is about bringing both parties to the table, acknowledging their shared humanity, and providing a space for them to explore and discover what brought them to that point, what's behind the issues that are bringing them into this space where they're in conflict, and how can they work together to move forward and find a mutually beneficial solution, separate from the positions that they may have taken when they came to the table. But that's a really difficult question to articulate simply. And I really try to take into consideration the audiences that I'm speaking to help them gain an understanding of how the understanding-based approach can provide value to their organization, institution, or practice to help them mediate conflict or to support conflict resolution wherever they are.
Thank you. That when you speak about target audience, I think that brings up a good point for any model or training or conflict resolution component. What exactly do you have? Does the center have a target audience, so to speak, or do you think it could is useful for anyone that is in conflict?
So it's interesting, as it was originally called the Center for Mediation and Law.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it was called that, people started coming to the trainings that weren't lawyers or in the legal profession because they had heard about it from colleagues or friends. And so we realized we were serving a broader audience. So when the collaborative practice movement started, we started having financial professionals, mental health professionals, and then we started having people from nonprofit organizations in leadership or staff role. Then we started having people in human relations, ombuds, and then we had people from that you wouldn't necessarily, wonder why were they coming? So someone from a grocery store that wanted to work with their staff better, someone that was on a fish and game team wanted to work with their team better, someone who was having conflict with their family wanted to be able to work through it differently. So it's gradually become a much broader based audience because people are so interested in being able to work through conflict in a different way. And they've heard about our model in various ways and decide they want to learn more about it.
Do you believe that it works? I mean, considering that we are in the, in the backdrop, a lot of times, as you say, a lot of people come from maybe the legal world. As you said, it used to be called the Center for Mediation and Law. So there tends to be a bit of a lean or a bent towards being evaluative and being directive in your, approach to problem solving and, mediating conflict. Can this exist in that world, or is this sort of like extrajudicial in some way, outside of a court, completely?
Yeah. So our model is not directive or evaluative, specifically because we actually think that's not the best approach for most people. I mean, there may be some people for which that's what they need, but in our model, we believe that the parties themselves are really the experts on their situation. And they may need assistance, they may need help or some guidance in terms of how to have that conversation. But they are the ones that know about what's important to each of them, which is what we try to get out into the room. They know their situation. They have an idea about what they want for their future. And all of that can happen whether you're in a judicial, a legal context. Maybe litigation's right around the corner. Maybe you're at the beginning of a legal conflict, but there's always the ability to have those kind of conversations, brainstorm about possibilities. I mean, what's really good about and can be helpful in a legal context is lawyers are really good at problem solving. They do that every day. And so to have that expertise in the room, to have them be able to bring some ideas, to look at the ideas and evaluate whether they're going to work, make sense, that's all really valuable. And the same thing happens in other kinds of conflicts that aren't legal conflicts. People know about their situation. They can bring in others that can help them figure it out.
Okay. Yes. It's the idea of self-determination, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. In fact, one of our underlying principles is let the parties own the conflict.
Okay.
And the idea is that the professionals are not the ones who are responsible ultimately for working through the conflict and making decisions. And so often professionals take that burden on, it's on their shoulders. And sometimes parties want to, or expect that that's what the professional's going to do. But we say it's actually the parties are in the center. It's their lives. They know a lot about it, and they're the decision makers. So they're very much in the center.
Okay. All right. And James, when you're, marketing and when you're sort of being somewhat of a spokesperson, if you will, for this kind of, understanding-based approach and this for the center, which kinds of people or organizations do you find tend to be the most interested in perhaps giving it a try?
Well, historically, that has been lawyers, law teachers, and judges, and more recently, as Catherine mentioned, human resource personnel, mental health providers, other professionals, and individuals have come to us from all over the world. Most recently, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Israel, Italy, France, Hong Kong, Australia. We trained a group of mediators in the Ukraine and Russia recently. So it's really a wide base, but what's most important to mention is that we're not aggressively marketing to anyone. Most of the people who participate in our programs, they come find us. We're a small nonprofit. We have a limited number of staff. Most of our employees are volunteers with our board or trainers through our programs, and we're very busy throughout the years just conducting those programs to people in workplace mediation and in our standard mediation training. And so typically we have people coming to us and asking about the model in the center and how they could potentially apply it in the work that we're doing. So most commonly it's somebody who's emailing or calling and saying, hey, I have a situation in a small nonprofit organization that I have where there's been some organizational change. Would someone be able to come and speak with us and put together a program to help train the individuals here to work better together and to overcome conflict that's happening as a result of change? Or we'll get individuals in a community center with similar situation who come and they want to put something permanent together that will endure in their community to help people who live and work among each other to be able to tackle the increasing levels of conflict that are coming up in the least expected areas. And then, of course, we have larger organizations and corporations who we regularly communicate with here in the United States and abroad as this way of mediating conflict and training conflict resolution professionals has grown. They're looking to create programming in a much more intentional way that becomes institutional so that they are able to address this conflict both with clients and internally in ways that are healthy and productive and ultimately in the best interests of organizations, companies, and the employees that they work with.
Okay, very good, very, very good. So it almost appears to have people are hearing about how this particular way of mediation and hearing about the center, and sort of their interest is piqued by the work that you do versus you having to necessarily go out and create buzz for the organization. Would that be a good way to sort of put it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
Okay.
Catherine would be a great person to respond to that just based on her decades of experience with the organization.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly wouldn't turn down buzz.
Right.
Buzz is always great because we actually want to spread the model. So that's really important to us. So there's some where we're trying to get the word out. And then we also, as James said, have people come to us. I mean, one really interesting thing that happened a few years ago was a journalist contacted us, and she had been commissioned to write an article about how journalists cover conflict. And so she was doing research. She ended up coming to one of our trainings, and then she was working with an organization called Solutions Journalism, which is a fabulous organization that works on helping journalists to include as part of stories, not just what's happening, but the solutions people are working towards. So we ended up adapting our model and training journalists about how to use some of our underlying concepts and some of our skills and techniques and concepts when they're working with sources, when they're doing their work as journalists. So people come to us from various places, and we try and figure out how does what we teach and know, how could it be helpful to them?
Okay. So, and I like the idea that it's adaptive and responsive, which is kind of what is necessary possibly to be an effective dispute resolver, to meet the parties where they are in some way. and again, to let them own the conflict, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually meeting parties where they are is another really important belief and concept for us. So we teach people about how to pay attention to what's going on inside of you, and your reactions to people, and are they putting up a wall between you and them, or are we trying to move people off of their position, which nobody likes. You want to be understood right where you are. You don't want someone to give you the impression, even if it's not direct from their words, that you're wrong. I have a better idea as a professional. Let me lead you there. We don't want to do that. We want to meet them where they are, understand where they are, and then talk about what the possibilities are for agreements.
Okay. And do you find that there's people that have misconceptions, or that they have to kind of unlearn certain preconceived notions about what it means to be a mediator and a conflict resolution professional to grasp this concept?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think most professionals who are working with conflict, or basically in any other kind of capacity, part of our education and schooling is we're gaining a particular expertise. And that's what people are coming to us for, is that expertise. And so when people think about helping people in conflict, they want to bring their expertise to that situation, but often that becomes taking over the situation, replacing their own ideas for someone else's. And that's where you get into the kind of mediation where people feel more pressure, that someone's telling them, you better do it this way or else it's going to be something worse. Let me tell you about the 17 ways that you could do this that I know about. And so it's unlearning that kind of almost knee-jerk reaction to put your own ideas out there. And to wait, it doesn't mean we're not going to put our ideas out there, but they're not the first thing that come out. We want to hear from the parties. We want to understand their situation. We want to really bring their perspectives into the room. And I think that's not something that we're used to as much, as certainly as lawyers, we're taught to be, talking, put the arguments out there. And, as we're talking to a client, we're already got our mental list of all the relevant things that we need to ask them questions about. We steer the conversation towards those. And it's really different when we're doing that as a mediator in our model. We don't want to be doing as much of that. We really want to have it be a conversation. And what's interesting is when you have those conversations with people where you're really trying to understand them, a lot more information comes out that turns out to be really critical and important that we might not get if we are going through our checklist of questions.
Yeah, I've often heard it said that people just really want to be heard, a lot more than, people kind of underestimate the power of having a voice, a literal voice and a figurative voice, right?
Yes, totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I guess towards this, I don't know, aim of people coming together and owning the conflict, meeting people where they are and all this kind of stuff. What do you see as unique? I mean, people, if you open up a textbook on mediation, you'll hear some of the same things, right, that you've said here, because it's taught a little in a more facilitative way for the parties to, sort of figure out what it is they would like to see, and how to work with each other. So what is different here? I mean, is it that with this one versus, any other mediation model?
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's, in some ways, almost a baseline of mediation, which is a lot of mediators expect to, because of the popularity of getting to yes, that we want to look at interests. So we want to go underneath, which is another one of our principles, go underneath the problem. But I think that's a lot of mediation approaches look at that, which is we want to do something other than just talk about positions and work our way towards a middle number. I think a lot of mediators understand there's one level that's underneath that, which is your interest. We actually look at another level that we can invite people to go to, which is meaning. And I think we're not the only ones to do this, but I think it takes it another step, which is when people are in conflict, particularly a conflict that might be so significant that you're going to someone else to help you work through it, it can have a major impact on your life. And particularly if it's around some kind of major life event. So it might be, a death in the family that's causing an inheritance dispute. It might be the breakup of a business that's been your whole identity, a divorce. So those kinds of life events can shake people up. And there's something about them that actually impacts what they feel, what they know about themselves, their core identity, what's the meaning of life. And so to be able to tap into that, questioning that, that sense of who they are can make a big difference in whether you can work through the conflict to come up with a solution that people can say yes to because it's meaningful, it fits in with this crisis they're having in their life. So we think it's really important to go to that step. And the way we do that is by having conversations where we're really listening carefully. And we have something called the loop of understanding, which is one of the ways that we teach people to have that listening. And then another, and I think this is really in a sense the heart of our approach, is paying attention to what's going on inside of you, both in a way to connect to the other parties, but also to keep yourself from not connecting to them. So we spend quite a bit of time paying attention and teaching people, what's going on in your body, what's it telling you about what's happening in the room, what are the judgments you're having, how is that impacting what's happening in the room and your ability to connect to the parties, what's happening on the feeling or emotion level for you, because it could be that's also happening with someone you're sitting with, and you can connect to them that way, or it tells you something about what's going on in the dynamics in the room. And I believe that our approach has a much greater emphasis on using that knowledge that you have and that feeling that you have inside of you to be able to work with people.
Okay. Yeah, that's extremely holistic and very in depth. And I think I asked before, probably in preparation for this, about the psychological component. It feels very much so rife with psychological and psychosocial and components. And I think I'd asked whether you needed to have that training, so to speak, in order to be able to really engage with this model. But I think you said, if someone does, great, but if they don't, it's not a requirement, correct?
That's correct. And we do get that comment not infrequently when we're in our programs, training programs, and we start to talk about feelings or what's going on inside. You're like, I don't know, this is a little touchy-feely, or is this really therapy? I don't know that I can have these conversations because they feel too much, like therapy. And they're human conversations. So we have conversations with people about our feelings. I mean, not everybody does, but feelings are always in the room, and we can have discussions about them. We can be open with our feelings. We can, even if we're with people that don't want to talk about feelings, they're still in the room. So we can be aware of them, even if we're not talking about them, because we're human and we have feelings.
Right.
And I think we're almost, and again, I think this is another piece of professional education for some professions, certainly for lawyers. I mean, obviously not for mental health professionals, but we're kind of taught, well, you should stand back. You should not be, caught up in the emotions of the situation. And you're going to bring the rational into the room. And I agree, being caught up in emotions probably isn't great if we think about them sort of overtaking, but that doesn't mean that we can't actually be with the emotions and be aware of them and use them as part of what we're doing in the room.
Okay. And James, I know you've made some content, some video content and other content about this mediation, this model in practice. And one of the things that I think we've been talking about is seeing the humanity in everyone. And one of the most interesting stories, or one of the most emotionally charged stories, are those that are human interest. So do you find that you bring out more of the human interest component to storytelling when you discuss this kind of an approach?
Well, 100%.
Okay. Okay.
We're human beings working with human beings to try to help them develop better relationships with and overcome conflict that they're having with other human beings. And it's at the heart of everything. And when you talk about this kind of psychosocial, our organization was founded with lawyers in mind by, Gary Friedman, one of our founders, was a trial lawyer, was fed up with the way the court system seemed to crush the winners and the losers and wanted to figure out a better way. And together with Jack Himmelstein, they put together the understanding-based approach to conflict resolution and mediation as a tool and a proven system for attorneys to use to help clients find a way forward. And that being said, human beings, we're not two-dimensional creatures, right? You can't look at a situation as it's just this particular issue that's in contention. There's got to be a winner and a loser. There's a good guy and a bad guy. Like, no, there's so much more to unpack with every individual in a situation about what brought them to the place that they're in, what is behind this conflict that's at issue, what else might be at play. And there's just so much more in acknowledging the humanity of an individual and the complexity of their experience, both their life experience and their personal and professional experience, that needs to be addressed. And in addition to that, from the mediator is also a human being. That's the third person, or if there are two people, that has thoughts and feelings. They have life experiences. They may have trauma or biases that they aren't addressing in the moment that can cause them to lean one way or the other, or to maybe hold back or not be supportive as in the neutral way that they're trying to be. And so this approach, again, initially put together for attorneys to help their clients, is designed to acknowledge the shared humanity that everybody has, and that there's a lot more to the story. And if we can all, at the base level in the beginning, come together with that understanding that we're all people and start to work together from that. So yes, if I'm writing stories or reaching out to people who've taken our training or who've been affected by it, like the Ukraine mediators that I recently spoke with, I'm trying to get to the heart of how their life has been impacted, either personally or how they've been able to go and help other individuals. Because at the end of the day, that's really what it's about. It's about having a better, more healthy life and interaction with people in our community and that we work with, and to help diffuse conflict. They can tear people apart. They could spend the rest of their life consumed by a situation that, even if it was resolved in the courts by a judge and a jury, it may never be resolved in their mind and in their heart, even if they came out the victor. And this is one approach that we find has been very successful because it's based on a process that has shown to work, and so much so that people from outside the legal arena have come to us unprompted, asking, well, what is it that you've done there? I'm interested in learning more about it so that I can try to seek some of these results and repair some of these relationships with people in my own life or in my community or in the place that I work. And so very much so, I believe that the human connection is there at a foundational level in everything that we do. And I'm deeply interested in bringing that out so that people can share how their life has been impacted by it.
Okay. How do you respond? Because this is something I hear, well, probably my own critique too sometime, but not to put myself in it too much, but, that these kinds of, approaches and models are not suited for sophisticated, complex corporate business type conflicts where there's, objective fact, where we've got facts and law and we've really got to stick to certain principles. We can't always talk about what we feel or what the meaning is behind something. We need to talk about what the facts are and how the law informs, those facts, or how it can be applied to those facts. So, how do you respond to that kind of criticism, that it just isn't for some of the more, upper level legal and, disputes?
So first, we actually believe that conversations about the law or the alternative to reaching agreement are an important part of the process. So we actually talk about the law. We have a way that we do it, which is we want to make sure that people understand the range of what might happen, and specifically then how it applies to their situation to the best that we can know that. So of course, in some legal disputes, it's a pretty broad possibility, and the law may be so unclear that actually the outcome is not that knowable. But in many legal disputes, there's a pretty good idea of how the law would apply to the situation. There may be differences between the lawyers on different sides of the case, but we can have that conversation. And if it's not a legal context, we can have conversations. For example, in a business, there might be rules or policies that will apply if people don't reach an agreement. So we actually want to have those conversations. And I think it's important to have those. It's just that's not the only conversation to have, because even when you're in a complicated business dispute or legal dispute, there are still people involved in it. Mm-hmm. They still have non-legal interests, non-legal pieces of the conflict. It may be their reputation is partly at stake. It could be, and often is, a very significant economic stake that could be impacted. And if you could find a solution that's actually better for both parties than the legal one, economically, that's really important to have those conversations rather than just focusing on the law. And there's all sorts of other ways that people come into the room, again, as the humans they are, with their non-legal perspectives and things that are important to them that are a part of reaching an agreement. Gary did a conflict between multi-million-dollar corporations that were in conflict with each other. And at one point they had the legal counsel and Gary and the very high executives in the companies in the room for the legal presentation. And they did that, but then they had the rest of their conversations and they were able to reach an agreement. And it wasn't just based on what the law is.
Oh, okay. That's very fascinating.
And I would add to that really quickly that when you talk about large, complex commercial issues, well, we have large, complex commercial organizations who regularly send their senior level employees from human resources, their ombuds office, their legal counsel, management, operations to our training programs to learn how to deploy this model to tackle just those sorts of situations. And some of those partners have been Intel, Roche, SAP. We have another workplace mediation program starting tomorrow with another large corporation who I don't know if we can mention because we haven't asked for their permission. But the point being is that there is proof in the outcomes that have been had based on the types of companies, the large complex organizations who are sending representatives from all different levels to come and learn how to deploy this. I think that speaks for itself in response to your question.
Okay. Speaking of deployment, has there been any organization or individual or just space in which this has been used that you were kind of surprised yourself? You're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe how well this worked. Or, I mean, is there anything where you were kind of, because we all, of course, in some ways, believe in what we do, but we say, well, I don't know about this particular type of, situation. Do you have any one of those kind of stories?
I can, my practice is focused on family law, so it's not quite there, but I know a story from Gary from having talked to him. And actually, he wrote a book called Challenging Conflict that was published by the ABA, still available, I'm sure, through the ABA. And in it is the story of working with the San Francisco Symphony. And they had been, I don't remember if they were on strike or were on the verge of strike. And they worked with the symphony, first with the groups of the players to try and come up with representatives and be clear about what was important to them. And then with management to make sure they were clear on what was important. So they were all working together with this quite, complex, large organization that at that point had become very polarized between management and the players. But by having those conversations about what was important, which, as you imagine, in the players, they had different players had different ideas about what was important, but trying to create a clear base of understanding for that. And then the same thing for management, they were able to reach an agreement and, keep the symphony together on a good path forward.
Yeah, that's a lot of stakeholders. I can imagine, even the different people by section, in terms of instrument they play might have a different interest or, just depends.
Yeah.
And now, a word from our partners.
Next Level Mediation Software is a mediator's best tool for advancing their online dispute resolution practice. It takes into account the psychological attitudes of the disputing parties and helps mediators find the key priorities to negotiate. Based on decision science and an easy-to-use interface, the Next Level Mediation platform can handle the most complex disputes. Register today at nextlevelmediation.com for your complimentary 30-day trial of the subscription service and enter the code ABA discount 20 for a 20% discount.
What is your hope for the Center for Understanding and Conflict towards the future? What do you we see to an extent where you've been and how the history of it and what you're doing now? What do you think? Where do you see it going? I should just say that.
So we last year had our first teacher training cohort. So we worked with 24 people from March through October to take a deep dive into both the model and how we teach, which is very interactive, a lot of role plays. It's a little bit different in terms of teaching than a lot of places do, much more sort of lectures and probably less hands-on than we do. So teaching them on our model, how to help people really get, as I talked about before, get inside and understand what's going on inside of them. So we have this cohort, and the idea was we wanted to be able to have more capacity for teaching and more ideas for where we could bring the model. And so we're continuing to work with them through this year, and then we'll be starting another teaching cohort in 2024, again, with the idea of expanding our ability to put on trainings, to reach people, to find other avenues. So from our current teaching cohort, there's someone who's interested in bringing it into religious organizations. There are people who are interested in bringing it to schools. There's someone who's interested in bringing it into prisons. So our hope is to expand both the possibilities and the actual trainings and bringing the model to places we haven't had the ability to do before.
Right. And I mean, I guess to also make it more, relevant to time, it appears like nowadays our sensibility is a little bit different, the way we speak to one another, the way we may not understand how to have a healthy conversation in working through conflict. So are there certain lessons that we can take, that may inform kind of how we deal with conflict in an everyday sense? Because it does appear that people's sense of decency has changed, as we sit here today.
I mean, it's certainly, I think, become more polarized in the last few years. And I think there's almost, for many people, a sense of hopelessness or powerlessness in how to have these conversations. One of the things that happened recently that gave me a little hope was that there is an author, the one I told you about, the journalist who came to our training. She wrote a book called High Conflict, and she was asked with someone else to meet with a group of chiefs of staff of some representatives in Washington to talk off the record about the model. So they couldn't discuss anything that was said in that meeting, but they were allowed to talk about the fact that they had it. And she actually wrote, a column about having had that conversation. And I find that's hopeful, because I think that's an area where a lot of us feel like there's a need to have a different way to go through conflict. So to me, I think there's places in our society now that could really use our model. And I think all the rest of us could too. And what's really interesting is we do a basic training that's 5 days, and usually it's around day 3. And I just kind of wait for this moment when someone comes in that day, and we always have something called open time where people can bring in ideas, questions, things they've been thinking about. And usually around day 3, someone will say, well, last night I had a conversation with my spouse, my
Mhm.
partner, my child, somebody that's very close to them. And I use this tool that we call the loop of understanding, and it works so great.
See?
That we had a
Yeah.
different kind of conversation than we usually do. So I think it's something that can be be very personal for people, and that they could use to actually change what happens in their own lives, as well
Mhm.
as the work they're doing that has conflict in it, or that they're helping people work through conflict.
Hmm. Okay. And related to this, James, what is the number one reason that you hear from people as to why they may be interested in learning about the model?
Because they heard it works.
Well, that's pretty
Because they have,
simple and
they've
concise.
worked with
Effective.
someone, or they've been friends with someone who was in a mediation situation and the outcome went much better, or they came away with it much more whole as a person. But ultimately, the simple answer is because it works, and they want to know how they can learn to make it work where they are. And that's what we're here to do. We're a small nonprofit organization. Our goal is to get this model out wherever it can be helpful. And we're very busy and focused in the communities that we already serve. We're always open to anyone who asks to figure out a way to translate these tools and these principles to help them where they are. And I think to your question about, how could someone apply our understanding-based approach in their personal life, and there's a lot to unpack there about how an individual could do it. And we'd love to come back and share more with you about that in the future if you'd have us. But there are basic principles. The reality right now, and to some degree, I guess it's always been the case, but at least in the last 20 years, and with the proliferation of technology and media and national attention, it seems like people are much more quick to be polarized and to align themselves with a particular group or position, and to not relent from it, no matter the cost, on principle,
Mhm.
and to forget that on the other side of whatever that is, whatever that issue may be, is another human being
Mhm.
who is equally passionate, but maybe also could benefit from being reminded that really in this situation, there's a couple of people with life experience and thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and it's not to sound psychosocial or get too far off into the weeds, but it's just a reality. You're a human being. I'm a human being. Catherine's a human being. Stuff comes up. Stuff drives us apart. And I think we're quick to do that now for all sorts of reasons, some of them quite serious and others maybe not so much. And there are tools that people can use that have been proven to work, that will help them in their daily life to overcome these issues and hopefully restore some balance and heal relationships, or at minimum, get over this massive block that's currently consuming their life and their headspace as a result of it.
Okay. And maybe I think one last thought. It sounds as though this is the kind of model that you would have to be. I mean, now I guess we've learned how to do more virtually, with different video conferencing platforms, and we communicate with people all the time, we using asynchronous and synchronous communication and things of that nature. It sounds like this requires in-person interaction, does it?
Well, I would have thought that 4 years ago,
Okay.
until we couldn't do that for a while. And I've actually been very surprised at how effective it can be over video conferencing.
Mm.
It was interesting both for the training and for doing the actual conflict work. Um, I think it's something you have to learn in how to connect with people when you're not there in person with them, but you can have those conversations. You don't feel quite the energy in the room that you can have. And sometimes that's actually, in some cases, that's occasionally better because the energy in the room it makes it so that people actually can't participate. They get so activated by the other person, they actually cannot participate. We don't want that. But you have to do things a little differently when you're on video conferencing, but it's still quite possible to use. In fact, of the work that I do now, I would say 80% of it is still in video conferencing. And I offer both being in person or video conferencing, and a lot of people are choosing still video conferencing for various reasons.
Right. And speaking of that activation part, when people are kind of together, you did mention that this is not the kind of model that you use shuttle diplomacy or people caucus. So maybe the video does kind of turn down the temperature just enough for people who might, be affected whichever way, by another's presence in the room, so to speak.
I would say sometimes it does, and
Okay.
sometimes it doesn't.
Okay.
Because people can feel very free to have a lot of, energy also when they're by themselves and not in the same room. Okay. I mean, I think it's really a question of when people are activated, what can you do with that? And there are definitely things that you can do to work with the dynamics in the room. And we don't want to just, dampen them down and make them go away. We actually want them to have that energy and passion they have. And so there's ways of working with them where they can still have those emotions and that, that energy, and maybe direct it in a way that's helpful. And that can happen whether you're in person or, on a video conference.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you both. Thank you, Catherine Connor and James Dykeman, for joining me, providing insight at the Center for Understanding and Conflict. I hope that it was insightful and informative, obviously to our listeners as much as it was to me. And I do think that it is transformative based on, what we've discussed today. I look forward to having another conversation about the specific training model, because I thought, I'm sure that it would be very interesting and fascinating for, people to hear exactly what it is that you do in practice, like, kind of in the act. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alex, for inviting us. It's really been a pleasure talking today, and I look forward to another conversation.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Alex.
Thank you for listening to Resolutions, a podcast about dispute resolution and prevention. If you enjoyed the episode and you'd like to help support our podcast, please share it with others, subscribe, or leave a rating and review. To stay up to date with all the latest info on dispute resolution, follow the ABA section of dispute resolution on LinkedIn and Twitter. Or for more information, other ABA dispute resolution programs and publications, including upcoming events, visit www.americanbar.org/dispute. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.